Are thrilled to have a presentation about one of the most important races in many, many years, as well as one of the most exciting presidential races we've ever had. And we've got the right guy to program it for us. And that right guy is Tom Edsall. Thomas Edsall was a Washington Post correspondent for many years and has written kind of some definitive books about campaigns and about race and politics in America, including Chain Reaction and Building Red America. And we were excited to have him here join us on the full-time faculty as the Joseph Pulitzer and Edith Pulitzer Moore Professor at the Journalism School when he came here in, I believe, 2006. He's also the political editor of the Huffington Post and is an example of someone who worked for a long time in traditional media, but like the rest of the school is really getting into the spirit of what's going on online. He has lined up two of his contacts and people he knows well to lead us in a discussion, and we hope an interactive discussion where you'll get a chance to ask a lot of questions. We ask you to use the mics and line up at the microphones a little later. And we're also going to be webcasting this online. Our new media fellows are shooting it, as you can see, a two-camera shoot. Alex, this should make you feel comfortable from CNN, and Jonathan as well. So we're really upgrading what we do around here. So please give a warm, warm welcome to Tom Edsall.
Hi, it's a real pleasure to be here. I thought before I started that I noted that I don't know if you all saw this yet, but Alan Brinkley, the provost, sent out a message to all of us warning of the potential of dangerous behavior and how to spot it. And among the things he says is a past history of violent behavior, social isolation, feelings of marginalization, extreme irritability, impulsivity.
I thought I'm the one who's supposed to talk about the McCain campaign.
Well, I think he would prohibit you from participating in a political campaign. And these two guys, we were thinking of putting a fence between them, but they've decided that they're members of the same fraternity or competing fraternities. First of all, let me thank Michael Schlein, who helped come up with this idea, Shri, and Elizabeth Weinrub Fishman, who all helped put this together. We are very lucky tonight. We have two people, one a Democrat, one a Republican, and let me introduce them. Directly to my left is Jonathan Prince. He has been in this business for more than 15 years. He is currently running the Democratic National Committee's Independent Expenditure Program, which is the program that has to be kept separate and apart from the campaign, which he will explain, I suspect. He was the deputy campaign manager for John Edwards this time and had a similar, but not quite as fancy a title in 2004. He really ran the campaign this year. He was a senior advisor in the Clinton White House, worked on everything from Kosovo to NATO to the impeachment trial. He was named one of the best and brightest by Esquire, and we are very pleased to have him here. Alex Castellanos, those of you who hang out in the lounge downstairs probably see him on CNN, where I think he's a regular contributor now. I mean, it's some kind of official capacity. Alex is famous for some of his ads. One of them is...
Fire away, Tom.
Well, I'll do the nice stuff first. He did the Wolves ad for President Bush in 2004, which was for those aficionados and in my class will learn more about this, was a echo of the Bear ad that Ronald Reagan used, and was a very effective, both ads were very effective. He more infamously did the White Hands ad for Jesse Helms. This was Jesse Helms was running against a black challenger named Harvey Gantt, and the ad basically said Harvey Gantt, by pushing affirmative action, is going to take jobs and job opportunities away from you, referring to whites, and it showed white hands crushing a job application, it looked like, or something to that effect. I'm not sure, there was another well-known ad in that where he, and I don't know if that was yours, where the ad said Harvey Gantt will mandate homosexual teachers in all the public schools.
Yeah, I can't take credit for that one.
But anyway, he's probably the only Republican in this whole room. So it's easy to pick on him. But he is also a charming guy.
We'll see.
He takes credit, I think legitimately, for the concept of soccer moms, and he earned he's known as, in the business, the father of the attack ad. He unfortunately picked the Mitt Romney campaign to get on board the last time. So in a certain sense, we have two losers here.
Same fraternity.
So in that context, what they would like to do is talk for 2 minutes each, and then I'll ask a question or two, and then the floor will be yours to do as you will. So Alex, as the lonely Republican?
Well, thank you, Tom. I thought we'd need 2 minutes to try to recover from the introduction, at least I would. Pleasure to be here with you, especially with Tom. You know, when you in Washington, when Tom was at the Post and your phone would ring and it would be Tom Edsall, it was tougher than getting a phone call from 60 Minutes. You know, it's somebody who has put the wood to Republicans and Democrats, and always fairly, but you always knew you were going to get tested by someone who knew what he was talking about, knew the issues, and was dealing with something big and profound and true, and so respected, I think, on both sides of the aisle. So whenever Tom calls, we listen and try to pitch in.
Shouldn't be nice.
Try to say all those nice things before he starts asking questions. Pleasure to be here again. So much we could talk about here, ads, and the most interesting campaign I think we've seen in political history. This time, I was telling somebody the other day, this is a little bit like this campaign's going to make the best country song ever. Who, if anybody had told you just a couple of years ago that a young, skinny guy who just finished paying off his college loans would beat Hillary Clinton, John McCain would come back from the political graveyard, that one of the previous vice presidential candidates on the Democratic side would have his personal life splayed out in the National Enquirer, that the Republican then would pick a moose hunter for vice president, and it'd be a woman. You know, this election has just seemed to get stranger and stranger, and we're still not there. So, an uncertain time. And my take on this election is that this is all about that one word, uncertainty. This is a new frontier election. We've seen this election before in a lot of ways. And we've seen it after the Great Depression, when the structure of the world as people knew it in America kind of collapsed. Oh my God, this is the world we live in. Who are we? Where are we going? Do we have any certainty about life at all? Saw the same thing after Sputnik with Kennedy. Again, a new frontier election. Reagan, very much the same election. The Cold War, does it end with a bang and a whimper? Even Bill Clinton, an election where America was kind of lost after the abundance of the 80s, lost having too much, not too little, but didn't know exactly where it was going. We're at one of those periods today, a very uncertain time, where security threats are new, something we hadn't imagined a few years ago, certainly not the bilateral threat, where we have economic challenges that are now global and we'd never seen. And so, in all of this, who do we pick? Do we pick the old guy who's not the future? Or do we pick the new guy who is the future and untested and uncertain, and risk versus change? So, and in all of this, then you have the journalistic community. We were just talking to a bunch of folks who, in the reporting business, who, hey, why don't people understand how valuable we are anymore? And we can talk about that, the role of journalism, how that's changed. But so many things to talk about in this election. Pleasure to be here.
It's great to be here too. Thanks a lot, Tom, for having us. Everything Alex said about Tom as a journalist is actually equally true about Tom at the poker table. He's always got something pretty hard hitting, and you never know exactly what he's going to bring to the table. And when it's time for Tom to bet, you get a little nervous, just like you do when the phone rings and he's got a question for you. I agree with Alex that this is an election that is in many ways characterized by uncertainty. Obviously the news of the last couple of days with on Wall Street, brings that to the forefront more than anything else that perhaps we've seen all year long. And I think that in times when Americans are terribly uncertain about the direction of the country, about the direction of their own personal lives, about how to make ends meet, about how to make things work, that's when, as Alex says, the question of risks really come to the table and are something that they're willing to tolerate. When you have an election that's a change election, or when you have a candidate who's a change candidate who's out there kind of offering something that's untested, offering something that's new, offering something that is characterized by uncertainty, and voters are content, it's just not something that they bite, just not something that they look for. When voters are out there, as they are now, as Americans are today, very deeply dissatisfied with the direction of the country, I think you get a dynamic where something like the risk that I think in voters' minds Barack does pose to some people becomes something very tenable and very acceptable. And you see that, the proof of that is nowhere else than, is best found in the McCain campaign itself, which has now thrown the experience baby out with the bathwater and is clawing its way desperately to kind of assume this veneer and mantle of change. This is a guy who's been in Washington, as all of you obviously know, for decades. So I think everyone understands now that the stakes, and frankly, that dynamic played itself out in our primaries as well, as Hillary ran a very, a race that made a lot of sense for all of 2007, that was based on strength and experience. And towards the end of the cycle, as she was just getting outmaneuvered by Barack over and over again, and to a lesser extent by the Edwards campaign, in Iowa on her other flank, she started grabbing the change mantle herself. So I think you see a little parallel there in the way the Democratic primaries played out towards the end with Barack and Hillary trying to assume that change mantle that to voters at that point just seemed foreign to her, and now McCain trying to do the same thing. So that's kind of my 50,000-foot take on where we are, but I'm happy to just kind of throw it out to you guys. Tom, however you want to do it and plow ahead.
Let me just ask you a couple of things to both of you. What's your take on Sarah Palin? Is she good? Bad?
Well, I'm going to grab this first because I'll run a little counter to type here. I thought Washington reacted to the choice of Sarah Palin in typical Washington fashion, and it, the kind of thing that generally disgusts me, which was everyone, Democrats and Republicans. She got trashed, no matter which place on the political spectrum you live. Everyone was after her, and it was just classic Washington. Well, I don't know who you are, so you must be a moron. But that's not how I kind of look at the world. I don't think that's how Americans look at the world ultimately. Whatever you think about her, and I've got some massive disagreement with many of her positions, and certainly her qualifications to be president of the United States, tomorrow. It's clear that this is a woman who's raising 5 kids, who got herself elected governor of her state by taking on the political apparatus in her state, and made her way onto a national ticket by the time she was 44. She's got to have something going on, right? And she is. She's a very formidable politician. And I think we made just overall, it was a mistake to underestimate her. So I think that it was a smart choice on McCain's part. I also think it was smart because in doing something that defied the conventional wisdom, even in his own party, that kind of said to the Republican establishment to do something different, it allowed him to reclaim his own sense of himself as someone who is a maverick. Now that's disproved, which we'll go through, in so many ways on the policy level, over and over again, where really his ambition and his desire to be president trumps everything else. But he thinks of himself as a maverick, even though he's not really one at all at this point. And the choice allowed him to defy Washington in a way that he's very comfortable with and kind of feel like a maverick again. And I think that's been good for their campaign. So it doesn't surprise me that coming off that choice, and obviously there's all the other things that you guys all know about how she energizes the conservative base. But together I think that all those things coming off their convention are, don't surprise me at all in terms of the way this race is narrowed, in the national polling. So I think it's a good choice.
Alex?
If the Democrats had said that right off the bat, Sarah Palin probably wouldn't have gained as much traction as she has. But in fact, I think part of the Democratic overreaction and the media overreaction to Sarah Palin made her a star. Just out of curiosity, so we know, how many people here voted for George Bush last time around? And are willing to say so in public in Columbia?
Right.
All right, that's where.
Who let you in?
Or would have, all right,
Right,
that's
right.
fair enough, fair enough.
Well, so how many people voted for John Kerry last time? So there are a lot of people.
So I guess you can vote when you're younger for Kerry. It's okay. Sarah Palin does a couple of things, obviously. One, it does energize the Republican base. Two, working class voters are on the table after the Hillary split. Hillary left a wound in the Democratic campaign, and the wound is not quite healed. Think of Macomb County in Michigan, the working class, blue collar, Reagan Democrat suburbs around Detroit, where the rule is if you carry Macomb County, you carry Michigan. If you carry Michigan, you get elected president. You know, a woman who hunts and fishes and can skin elk and moose and an occasional donkey has great traction there. And the third thing is it does women. Now, most of the Hillary Clinton voters that were on the table, 2/3 or more, very ideologically left of center and no chance. But there are some who found a kindred soul in a strong woman who can make her own way in the world, Hillary Clinton, and who see a little bit of that in Sarah Palin. So we've seen a little movement there. So three ways it helps. But the big thing I think that Jonathan's exactly right about is that the McCain campaign had no theme. It couldn't tell you exactly why. It could tell you why Barack Obama was not, shouldn't be president, but it couldn't really tell you why it should. And we saw some of this, the same problem Hillary had in the primaries. Looking election night at the exit polls, ask Obama voters why they're voting for Obama, 82%. Change. Ask Hillary voters. Well, change, a third. Experience, a third. Cares about people like me, a third. They couldn't tell you because the campaign didn't know. McCain was in that same situation. Now they know. They're the campaign of Change Washington. Change Washington, and America can achieve anything. Now they have an idea. And that is, you know, it's an idea that fits McCain's personality and character. He's the outside rabble-rouser. You know, he's not the guy you let into the country club. He's the guy you keep out of the country club, and now he's got that kind of campaign, so it's helped him find his voice. And as far as the experience argument goes, well, okay, let's assume Sarah Palin is completely unqualified to be president. That's really bad news for Obama because you can make the case he has even less experience. And so, you know, if you were asked to ask the Obama folks a month ago, what's the one issue you don't want to be talking about every day from now until the end of the election, experience would have been right at the top of the list. And for some strange reason, the Obama people decided to get into a daily fist fight with the other team's vice presidential candidate. No, tackle the one with the ball, not the one who doesn't carry the ball, on an issue that is not to their advantage. So for a lot of reasons, politically it's a good choice. I do think that the most fascinating thing about all of this, Jonathan hit it right on the head, was the media overreaction that made her a star. And
it was Republicans too.
And
it was
Republicans
everybody. It was the
too.
whole Washington crowd.
It was everybody. And it's true, yeah, you're not on the talk shows, how can we take you seriously? When in fact, there are times it takes somebody from the outside to bring change. It's the, you know, the revolution candidate. The revolutions aren't often started from the inside. And so, you know, John McCain met this woman, thought he'd met a mixture of Harry Truman and Margaret Thatcher, and said, suit up. A lot of people have gotten married on shorter dates.
I'm not sure about that.
Doesn't mean it always works out.
Let me just ask one more question. Could people start lining up if they want to ask a question? For both of you again, do you think this is an election where there will be a significant change in the nature of the two parties because of the candidates? You've got Obama not only appealing to blacks, but to young people, to well-educated elites, not doing that well with working class whites. And then you've got the McCain ticket bringing on a Walmart mom in a, is this going to start shifting the way that the composition of who is a Democrat and who is a Republican, so that we will be totally past the FDR kind of coalitions of the past?
Well, unfortunately, I think one of the challenges that our party faces and has faced for a long time is that we have not held together the FDR coalition so well. The last Democrat to win working whites in a presidential election was Bill Clinton in 92 and 96, who won them by a point each in a three-way race. You know, Al Gore, when he won the popular vote, lost by 17 points, working class whites, and Kerry lost them by 23. So that, you're outlining a challenge, but it's a challenge, unfortunately, that we have faced for a long time. And I don't, I mean, it's all in the numbers, obviously. I don't really agree with Alex that these Hillary Clinton voters are going to end up swarming, and he didn't really say swarming, so I'm overcharacterizing.
All we need is a few.
Swarming to the McCain campaign. I don't think that'll happen at all. I think, you know, somebody who was a very, very smart guy, a guy named Paul Tully, who was kind of like our Lee Atwater in our party from ways back, who died in 1992 in a hotel room in Little Rock right before Bill Clinton got elected president. But Paul once said about all the various interest groups that are out there, the leadership of, and you pick a demographic group and talk about their leadership, that the leadership tends to be irrational and the voters tend to be rational. And obviously there are people in the Clinton campaign who are very, very attached to that campaign, whether they're donors or raisers, whoever else they are, people who, you know, it's easy for them to get in front of a microphone, who are worked up and still angry. But the people that supported Hillary Clinton went out in droves for her campaign because they too were sick and tired of the direction of this country for the last 8 years. They are not suddenly going to just have a complete change of mind and heart and decide to support some guy who's voted with George W. Bush 90% of the time. It's just not going to happen. So the answer is I don't think there's going to be any big demographic shift after this election. I think you do, however, outline something that is a real challenge for our party and has been for some time and continues to be.
Alex?
Before you get back to the original question, I'll just make a point that for Republicans, you know, we're not looking for Hillary Clinton voters to come over in swarms. Ain't gonna happen, okay? Understand that. However, you know, as far as I know, the most powerful force on earth is sex. And it's pretty powerful stuff. It seems to have gotten us here. I mean, it drives evolution here, so for, among other things, so the mingling of the genes and life moves forward. There is something happening here. There is a gender politics at play. And again, the Hillary vote is not monolithic, and it's not just the Hillary vote. There are a lot of women who have found themselves over the years in Sarah Palin's shoes. Somebody who's been a governor, somebody who's run a business with 24,000 people, somebody who's, who, whether she's qualified or not, wanted a job interview before she was told, hey, Missy, I'm sorry, this is a big boy's job. This is not for you. And I think there are a lot of women who've walked in those shoes, or those heels, or whatever the case may be. And I think in that, I think she earned a look. And I think, so there is some gender politics at play here. As far as whether the coalitions are going to change who we are, both parties are a bit lost, I think, in terms of who they are going forward. The world has changed. The old, you know, Republicans suffer from an identity crisis in that we're still the party that's against governing, which is bad when you're trying to run for a government job. And so finding a way to solve problems, even if you think, I think you're going to see Republicans talk a lot of the kind of message that Barack Obama talks about, a more organic way of governing, get money and power out of Washington into things that actually work. I think Democrats are, you know, the era of big government is over, but they don't know what's next. What era are we in? Ask a Democrat what a Democrat is, they can't usually tell you. Yes, we're for the thing we're not for anymore. They're kind of the big, you know, the tall, short, thin, fat party. It's hard to say what a Democrat is. So I think until both parties resolve this conflict of exactly what is your governing philosophy, who are you, it's going to be, you know, the Democrat solution for that is kind of the coalition of the aggrieved. The Republican solution for our identity crisis is now it's class politics and anti-Washington and anti-government.
Why don't you go ahead?
Looking at the Palin effect, I'm very curious to hear your perspective on why Obama didn't pick Clinton, and whether or not you think he regrets that now that we've seen what can happen.
Jonathan might know more than I would, but probably might be the same reason John McCain didn't pick Mitt Romney. Sometimes you just doesn't click.
I think that's exactly right.
Would be my guess. Would it have been a better political choice? It's easy to say that now when you don't see the cost it would have imposed.
Right. It's impossible to know. I worked for the Clintons for a long time, for eight years. And I have great admiration and respect for them. But obviously, having the Clintons, and you get both of them, it is definitely a 2-for-1 deal at this point. You get both of them when you take one of them. God, who knows what would have happened? Who knows what President Clinton would be out there saying? Who knows? It's really impossible to gauge.
Don't you think, Jonathan, that Bill would have stepped back from the limelight just a little bit and left center stage?
They were going to cancel
Obama?
the Clinton Global Initiative that's invading New York next week. Not. So I think Alex is exactly right. It's impossible to know, and a lot of it comes down to personal chemistry. It is a very, very personal choice, and should be a very personal choice for both the people at the top of the ticket, because that person is going to be, your partner for the next 4 or 8 years if you should win. But 2, someone who you really have to trust backwards and forwards. If you don't feel like you can trust them, if you feel like they're out there second guessing you, if you feel like they're out there undercutting you, or their staff are, it trickles down from them to their staff's friends, and it can just completely destroy an administration. Our administration, frankly, functioned much better for the first 7 years than it did when things started to get a little tough between President Clinton and Vice President Gore at the end, when there was some bad blood over Monica and over what that did to Gore's election chances and all that. So it's a very personal choice, and it ought to be.
One thing I always, and again, from a Republican point of view, take it for what it's worth, I'm not necessarily trying to help the other side, but one of the things that's worked well for vice presidential picks the last few years is somebody not who balances your weaknesses or balances your ticket, but somebody who complements it. For example, a Barack Obama, the other way could have gone would be in a Tim Kaine. Young, untested, but says change. And you wonder now, looking at this, if in a way does the Biden choice highlight his inexperience? Does it, by admitting in a way that you are compensating for it, does it kind of denude him of some of that mantle of change? There may have been other ways to go, but the one you pick is always the worst one. That's a rule.
Go ahead.
Just want to preface this by saying I thought it was interesting that John McCain was referred to as the candidate who would be kept out of a country club. Because if history is any guide, Barack Obama would be kept out of a country club, and probably still would be.
He got you, Alex.
So that's actually my question, is how do you see the racial, there's been a lot of talk about the gender dynamics in this panel and in the media recently. The real question for me is, how do you see the racial dynamic of this election playing out in the last month and a half in terms of advertisements? Remember Harold Ford, and in terms of media coverage. Thanks.
You get to go first because you made the white hands at it's penance.
I asked a fellow named Scott Rasmussen, who does a survey, to put this question on one of his surveys. If Colin Powell ran against John McCain, how would he do? And Colin Powell beat McCain by 25 points. So, a much different race than, say, Obama, than the head-to-head numbers, obviously, with Barack Obama now. Does race play a factor in decision-making in American politics? I can't imagine that it doesn't. Is it our noblest impulse? No. Is Barack Obama have other reasons that he's trailing the generic ballot by 6, 7 points at times? Yeah. You pick the most liberal guy in Congress, you pick in the Senate, you pick a guy who's never actually run anything, you pick a guy who is untested in an uncertain time. John Kerry lost because an uncertain man in an uncertain time. And in stormy seas, sometimes people, if your life raft is really sinking, yeah, you get out of it. But if in stormy seas, sometimes people cling to the life raft they're on. They want security, not instability, i.e. change. So yeah, there are lots of other reasons for Obama having the difficulties he is. Is America, I'm the guy who worked for Mitt Romney because I didn't think that his faith would be, naively so it turns out, would be that big of an issue. Well, I guess what? It was. In the South, a lot of folks saw it as a competitive religious threat, and that actually affected the election. So yeah, I think it obviously has a bearing on it, but it's not going to be unanimous. There are for any of these guys, there are other kinds of factors as well.
I think it's an interesting polling question that the Powell-McCain thing, although I tend to think it doesn't tell us much more than the fact that Americans would rather have Colin Powell president than John McCain. Because just by the nature of having two Republicans against each other in a general election, basically every Democrat on earth who answers that question is going to pick Colin Powell because they perceive him as more moderate. And then he's got some of the Republicans available to him. So, I would have imagined he would have crushed McCain. Still, it's an interesting question. I also think that, I think Alex is exactly right. Obviously, race is still a part of our politics and a part of our life, and it can be ugly and it can be horrible, and it's not something that we're going to get away from in 2008. Although I do think that just by the very nature of having Barack Obama on the ticket, it helps to move us a little bit closer. And so I think that alone is obviously a wonderful thing. I think if you're really crushing the statistics, I think the truth is that the great majority of the people who unfortunately would allow themselves to think that way are not really available to us anyway. That's not true across the board. Obviously, I'm sure, it goes without saying that this, unfortunately, this is still an issue for some people when it ought not to be. But I think the great majority of people who are motivated by that are not available to Democrats right now. I just say one other thing. The other thing is that we talk about this being close. This election is close. This election was always going to be close because we're still a 50-50 country. The only person who would be getting crushed right now is George W. Bush. Okay? People are done with him. I think Alex would agree with that. I think you could put any Democrat or any Republican in a matchup against George W. Bush, and that guy would be 35 points behind. Okay? It is only the diehards of the diehards who want to see him for another moment on their TV screen or darkening the door of the Oval Office. But when you take him out of the picture, when you have a Republican that they're just getting more familiar with and a Democrat they're just getting familiar with, which is ultimately what it really is because folks are just now really focusing on this. The great middle class of voters, I don't mean economic middle class, but the folks who come right there in the middle, who did not participate in the Republican process, who didn't participate in the Democratic process, those guys are just tuning in. And it's a 50-50 country. It's just not shocking to me. I never would have expected anything but it to be neck and neck in mid-September. So,
Dick Cheney would also get crushed.
Fair enough.
Bush
might even beat Cheney if there was a kind of Bush-Cheney matchup.
My thanks to both of you for coming. This is fascinating. I wanted to share a thought and just get your reaction to that. What makes this presidential race so repulsive is that there are a glut of people on TV who are saying things that they themselves don't believe. You can see it in their eyes. They're just mouthing what has, the talking points.
I think I might go on this one.
Yeah,
it's all you.
You can see it in their eyes.
Are you referring to Alex?
They are just repeating the talking points that they've been told to repeat. And I think Bill Maher put it most crisply this week. He said, true cynicism is saying things you don't believe and saying things that aren't true, but knowing that you can get away with it because the people in the audience are too stupid to know the difference.
Well, gee, that's a lot to talk about. A couple of interesting things. The role of the media, the news media, I think has changed a lot in politics. One of the things that's happened, of course, is the news media market has fragmented, and we were talking about this earlier. Used to be a few people with big brushes who painted the big canvas of what voters knew, right? The big canvas of knowledge, or whatever we want to call it. That's done now, and now it's a little bit more pointillism. There are lots more dots and information, people getting their information from other sources, and they don't need the guy with the big brush, the gatekeeper, telling them necessarily what to think. They find their information, and they're their own gatekeepers. It's a bigger canvas, I think. One of the things that's meant is that whether it's cable or print journalism, or that to try to maintain market share, these people have journalists go more deeper into the campaign. Here's what's really going on in the campaign, and so become a part of it. And in becoming a part of the campaign, it's now where the playing field, I mean, those things affect the campaign. Guess what? That's now part of the political arena too. So I don't think when you're looking at cable news, I think a lot of times now, or even some in the press, you're not looking at something distinct from the campaign that is commenting and observing it. Sometimes you're looking at something as very much a part of the politics, and that is therefore used by campaigns to get out their message. So yeah, there's quite a bit of, hey, my pundit versus your pundit. I've been invited on CNN to try to, I'm a Republican who generally supports my party's candidate and all that, but I've been asked, hey, speak about this from what you see here as, from your point of view and experience as an operative in campaigns, and what this means, and try to say things only you can say based from that experience. So, yeah, there's a lot of that. I don't think it's the most fun for, people that to get into the kind of the mud fight of it. But it's also a little bit like a courtroom, right? And they stand there, one side, the Democrat, the other side, the Republican, and you're an attorney arguing for your side, and you try to make your best case, and you respect those people for doing it. And I don't think you're necessarily insulting the intelligence of the voter by offering them those points of view and asking them to make a choice, no more than you'd be insulting the jury. I mean, you presume there's a certain, if you can see it, why, are you the only one? You're the only smart guy in the room who can see you've got to presume voters can see it too.
I agree with all of that. I also think that, it depends who you're talking about. The airwaves are now, the glut of 24-hour cable television has now given us, a glut of people who go on TV and talk. And there are folks with different roles. There are journalists who are giving analysis, and they have one standard of objectivity that's required of them. There are official campaign spokespeople who have an entirely different standard. I mean, their job is to say what the campaign is saying. Then there are the class of people like Alex, or Alex in a little bit of a different role now that he's, working directly for CNN. No, because that changes
politics,
but someone like me, who until I took on this independent expenditure project at the DNC, was unaffiliated, who goes on TV and is going to support my party, obviously, but you want to have, obviously, credibility and speak with candor to the extent that you're not actually damaging your party's, the campaign of your party. So I think there's a kind of whole range of expectation in terms of what different people are supposed to deliver and the kind of objectivity you ought to expect from them. And I think the audience is smart enough to know, okay, when Nicole Wallace or Bill Burton is out there saying the party line, well, that's all they're doing is saying the party line because that's their job. But if they see, Alex and I going at it, well, they say, okay, these guys are a little bit more removed. Well, we expect a little more honesty from them, and you might hear someone say something like I said, which I thought Sarah Palin was a good choice, and here's why. And you might hear something like Alex said, which is that John McCain had no message till 2 weeks ago, and here's why. And that's the kind of range. Now, I do think that the most interesting thing that this kind of conversation leads us into is the whole notion of what the media's role is today. And Tom wrote a great piece just the other day about the kind of outrage that some of McCain's advertisements have provoked from even traditionally, more self-effacing media outlets like the Associated Press, who essentially called a bunch of his ads more or less a web of lies, where they and then not just ads but ads and statements going out there and saying that Barack Obama somehow called Sarah Palin a pig, which was just an extraordinary dishonesty, for example, or suggesting that they have an ad suggesting that Barack actually wants to have sex education in kindergarten. Just a complete fabrication, okay? So
Let's talk about those 2 points.
sure, but so I think that the media is kind of struggling with finding its role in arbitrating some of this, and you're looking to non-traditional outlets to kind of step in more and more as the traditional outlets kind of abdicate that role. One journalist who's a very close friend of mine told me a story about an outlet, and I'm not going to say the outlet or the journalist, but this journalist was in an editorial meeting just a week ago, and they were looking at a McCain ad, and the journalist was saying, well, everyone here is talking about how false this ad is. Are we going to say that it's false? No, that's not our job. That's up for the voters to figure it out. Well, if the media is not providing that information, how, it's kind of a devolution of responsibility that I think some of these more mainstream media outlets have adopted as they assume that it's okay that their traditional responsibility has been picked up by the new media outlets. And I think it's a terrible abdication of responsibility. So.
A couple of points here on McCain ads, and again, I'm not making them, but a couple of things worth noting. On the Barack Obama called Sarah Palin, a pig, or I guess cosmetics and farm animals, as Mark Halperin likes to talk about it, so that he doesn't repeat the phrase. I'd love to be able to defend my party's nominee on that. I can't. Haven't been able to on cable television. Nothing I can say about that one. It's just don't happen to think that was true or that was what he was doing. However, on the sex education one, I would recommend you guys actually take a look at that, because it's interesting to hear the Barack Obama and the media's defense of that. And that's not what he wanted to do. It was CNN last night, and I called him on it there. It's not what he wanted to do. What he wanted to do was protect kids against sexual predators. You know what? I believe that. Absolutely believe that's what he wanted to do. But I don't get, voters don't get candidates' good intentions. We get what they do. Hey, George Bush had good intentions. He wanted the war to work out really nice. It didn't happen to work out that way. We get what they do. And in that legislation was other stuff. And it was stuff, the SECA standards, Sex Education and Information Council of the United States, that said 5 to 8-year-olds should be taught about lifestyles and body parts and some things, and you can make the argument, if you're a good farmer in Missouri, hey, I might not want my kids to know about that. That's a reasonable debate to have. But to presume that there was, how do you think we get all the crap we get from Washington? It's not from people with horrible intentions, it's people with good intentions who do dumb things at times. It happens. And it may have happened here, so I would commend it to take a look at that. And the other thing is, imagine you're John McCain, and you used to have this hot girlfriend named the news media that loved you. And then one day you woke up and she'd run off with the new guy. You'd be crushed. And then this new guy, in the eyes of the girlfriend, could do absolutely no wrong. Everything the new guy did was just wonderful, and everything you did was terrible. And this new guy, for example, put up an ad that said, John...
So you're hearing a little of the Romney jealousy creep through there.
No. This is McCain and Obama. But the Obama people put up an ad that says, John McCain has this, supports a tax cut, a special tax cut for oil companies, $4 billion. Okay, well, there is none. McCain supports a big tax cut for everybody, including oil companies. But there's no special tax cut for oil companies. And that's been a cornerstone.
$4 billion of it goes to oil companies.
Which, by the way, Obama has now said he himself is considering a broad-based tax cut like this.
Not a broad-based corporate tax cut with $4 billion that goes to oil
But
companies.
the clear intent of the Obama admin, this is a $4 billion tax cut for oil companies. And we can debate, all of that. But the point of it is, that's what they're trying to convey. If you're a Joe voter, you're going to think McCain's got this thing in a box that does this one thing. Who called the Obama campaign on that? Where is the truth test there? There wasn't one. There hasn't been one. And if you're in the McCain campaign and you say, okay, those are the rules we're playing under, fine. All I'm saying is that the invitation to have the kind of campaign we're having there are a lot of people responsible for the kind of campaign we're having now.
I don't know who's first between
yeah.
you two guys.
I was going to come ask about the advertisements as well. I mean, you know, I saw John McCain on the View the other night, and they said to him, "Why are you running lies?" And at first he said, "They're not lies," which was a lie. And then he recanted and sort of said, "Well, you should see what he's running against me," which I took to be kind of an admission of guilt. I don't know what that meant. But, you know, I guess what you're saying is that, you know, you guys just debated there back and forth about whether this tax cut was legitimate, not who it's for. But when someone's running lies, which are, I don't know, from the Republican side, are those beyond the pale, reprehensible, worse, more vicious than wolves and bears? Like, that's a question I would ask you. How do you debate that with someone, I guess then for the Democratic side? Should Obama fight fire with fire and unleash his own lies back, or should he stay with the high ground? So, you know, I don't know, what's his strategy, and how do you debate lies, I guess is the question.
Okay, so here's where I'm going to give the little caveat that Tom hinted would eventually be coming, which is because I'm running this independent expenditure for the party, I am prohibited by law from speaking to the Obama campaign. So since I started doing that in July, I can't talk to any of those guys. I mean, to be clear about it, if you saw me walking down the street with somebody, it doesn't mean I'm breaking the law. Or, you know, we could talk about baseball and our kids, but we can't talk about campaign strategy or anything like that. So I can't, anything that I give you is kind of my own opinion. It's not, you know, any particular insight into their strategic thinking at the moment. But no, what you do with lies is pretty simple. I think I was going to say the same thing. You immediately crush the lie, first of all. You hit back pretty darn hard about the lie. I don't think, and I certainly wouldn't advocate that the Obama campaign, you know, turns itself into a crass political organization like the kind of organizations that he's run against and built a brand running against for the last nearly 2 years. So no, I don't think that's what they ought to do. I think that, frankly, there's no need for them to do that because there is ample evidence in the McCain record to you know, make it clear why exactly this guy ought not to be president. And you could, you know, speaking of brands, I think Obama ought to be preserving their brand and debunking the McCain brand of maverick. Because this is a guy who gets out there talking about for years how he's one of the only Republicans who cares about global warming, and then he's got a tax cut that gives $4 billion to oil companies. This is a guy who talks about bringing Democrats and Republicans together for immigration reform, and then he's out there now saying he would vote against his own bill. You know, this is a guy who said that he wants to run a different kind of campaign, would never take the low road to the White House. He's got these ads we just talked about. Now the people who did the Swift boat ads are out there making ads for John McCain. All he's saying is, oh, I can't referee. Well, let me tell you something. Having run independent organizations like I'm running now and having done it in the past, if John McCain get out there and said, I want those Swift boat ads down, I want them down, 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 made it darn clear he wanted them down, they would come down. If I put an ad up and I heard Barack Obama, not calling me directly obviously, saying, I want that ad down, I want that ad down, I want that ad down, I'd take the ad down. So it's baloney when he tries to pretend that he can't have any influence on this process. And it's just another example of him trying to have it any which way he can to further his ambition. So bottom line is I don't think the Obama campaign needs to resort to lies when the McCain record is chock full of truths that are plenty damning on their own.
I'll keep my less partisan hat on a little bit here
Did I get a little heated?
in response.
We're passionate in this election now.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are, which is a good thing. You know, I can't imagine a politics with nothing worth fighting over. Why would we even bother? Ordinarily, on occasion, politics reflects real life, and usually when it does, it's a good thing. So if you ever want to know what to do in a political campaign, what would you do in real life if somebody says something about you that's not true? Look them dead in the eye and say, that's a lie. And we deserve better than that, and set the record straight. And that's what, for example, I think Obama should go on TV and do a spot that says, look, here's what, if he thinks McCain is lying about him, go on TV and say, look, here's what John McCain's saying about it. I didn't get into politics it's not true. I didn't get into politics to drag it lower than it already is. I think we can do something better. So if I don't have the strength to stand up for change now in politics, how am I going to have the strength to serve as president and really bring change to this country? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stand up right now and say, look, that's wrong. It's not true. And besides that, we can do something better. And I think Obama should agree. I think Halpern's point is, why don't you, Obama says, let's have the debate tomorrow. Call him out on it. But the problem is, of course, that it's not quite that simple. Both sides have have edged very close to the line here. I know that Saint Obama is pure of heart here in everything he says and does, and they've never crossed the line. But the facts of the election are otherwise. For example, yesterday John McCain has a speech in which he says, hey, the fundamentals of the economy are strong, and continuing in the same sentence without a break or a pause, he says, but we've got an economic crisis on our hands. Now, most of us would look at that tape and say, okay, I get what he's doing. We're in an economic meltdown here. You know, Wall Street firms are turning to sawdust in front of our eyes. This affects people's retirement and college funds and living and everything. And so the first thing you do in leadership is what? Reassure the public, restore public confidence. It's going to be all right. We're going to go over here. Now here's what we're going to do. You get that, right? Instead, that's being painted as, hey, look how out of touch old John McCain is, thinking the fundamentals of the economy are strong. Well, that's not the truth of what he was saying. Now, at the end of the day, how does all this play out? Maybe it plays out exactly the way it should be playing out. Both sides are out, hey, you're lying about me, you're lying about me, here's the story, the public's better informed, you guys are the judge and jury, and you decide. Generally, I think it works out pretty well.
I think, for what it's worth, that there's a vastly different way to reassure the country about the overall American ability to move forward, recover, and do better than to have the first thing out of the box say, when millions of Americans are absolutely terrified, when unemployment has jumped past 6%, jobs have been lost, I think now for 8 months in a row, when foreclosures are, I don't know what it's, something like 10,000 foreclosures a day, and then Wall Street, as you said, is, you know, melting into sawdust. I think that you could do a little better than come out of the box and tell people everything's strong. I don't agree with that. I think you could say, we're in a deep crisis, explain why, and say, but there's, you know, like Bill Clinton famously said in 1992, there's nothing wrong with America that can't be fixed by what's right with America, and talk about how you're going to put this economy back on track. I do think it demonstrates a kind of lack of understanding of where, I'm not even disputing the notion that kind of some bedrock economic fundamental indicators are still reasonably okay. What I'm saying is that it is a fair example of John McCain being out of touch. What he's out of touch with is how regular Americans are going to respond to that. And he's trying to lead this country. And he's not understanding how they feel and the deep uncertainty that you began the conversation by talking about that they have about where this economy is going when he comes out and says something like that. So that's really what I think the issue is. I don't think the issue is so much a substantive one of, you know, what metrics we should be examining to determine the economy's overall statistical health or potential recovery. I think it's about the way he talks and what he says and how he understands what's going on in the lives of ordinary Americans.
Well, by that argument, then McCain would have grounds to say that Obama shouldn't have called Sarah Palin a pig because he should have known the political implications of how that would be received.
But he didn't call Sarah Palin a pig.
No, but your point is he should have, it's not about that. Your
he
point
called
was just that
the Experience campaign attempting to call itself change.
My point would be that Obama should have known how it would have been interpreted by some people and therefore shouldn't have said it.
No, that's not really my point.
To a silly place, but
you
choose. We disagree. On this we disagree.
Go ahead.
Hi there. I'm from the United Kingdom,
Yes.
where broadcast political advertising is illegal. And coming to the States, I found it very strange to witness this culture of advertising, particularly attack ads, on the television. And my question is, do you think the American political culture and system would be improved by banning televised political advertising?
No.
God, I hope
no
not.
way. I mean, I think all three of us are going to say the same thing on here. Speech is such a fundamentally important American right that I just, any law like that would make me crazy, to be honest.
If so, why don't we ban other negative things in the debate? I would submit to you, especially in a presidential race, the most powerful negative force, destructive force, is by no means political ads. It's journalism. Right? It's journalism's job is creative destruction. It is to challenge, I mean, good news is not going to find its way to the front page of the paper, right? And its job is to challenge the truth of these campaigns, challenge the facts, uncover what, how much positive news is there going to be on CNN
doesn't emanate
tonight?
within the campaign itself, though. It doesn't emanate from within the opponent directly, nor is funded by it.
But my point is, that negative dialogue that the news media initiates, I think it's a great thing. It compels change. It forces people to examine what they look at, and I think the same thing is true for campaigns.
But the negative dialogue is not with the news media, it's with naive and inexperienced viewers who don't understand what they're seeing.
Yeah, but to my mind, the idea, as Daniel Webster said, if the people want to go to hell, it's my job to take them there. To my mind, the idea that you could ban, the idea that you'd ban any kind of political speech is perhaps the most anti-American idea that I could possibly think of.
It's paid for advertising.
Of course it's speech. It's absolutely speech. A campaign is ultimately a collection of money raised by supporters of that campaign to deliver its message and views and opinions to the country to let the voters make a decision. And they can make their decision any way they want. And the idea that somehow we would take any kind of political speech off the table in a democracy is just fundamentally anathema to democracy to me. I mean, it really makes me shiver, to be honest. I'm not...
Presumed in all of this, of course, is, as you said, that these poor people out there don't really know what they're doing, but somehow say, you know better.
I mean...
okay, that's a different system here. You know, we could have a single-payer political system that would have a lot less conflict, that would be, you know, a lot more harmonious, and we could all stand on soapboxes and speak lofty thoughts. Think about sex.
Again.
I don't know why it's on my mind, but think about sex. There are ways you can have kind of the single-payer system there too, you know, less conflict, no male and female, no conflict, no trauma, no feathers, no... But it turns out that in this conflict, genes mingle, things change, life moves forward, you get evolution. The amoeba is the opposite of that. It is the thing with no conflict, and life does not move forward at all. And I think one of the great gifts of this horrible, you know, this chaotic, terrible violence that we see, not only in politics, but you see in the economy, that you see in the marketplace of ideas, is good things live, bad things die, they're tested, and life moves forward. And I would hate to see, for the sake of harmony and for the sake of the, you know, lowest common denominator, beat the conflict and the drama and the chaos out of speech and life and politics.
So are you saying the BBC is an amoeba?
I'm sorry?
Are you saying the BBC is an amoeba?
Yes.
I mean, Tom, this seems, not to turn the tables on you unfairly, but this seems like a legitimate one for you to jump in on too.
I was just wondering whether Alex is going to get in trouble for endorsing evolution.
Probably. Probably.
But I have to, I am 100% with Jonathan on this one. I think campaigns are wide open, and any official effort to restrict them is inherently, as Jonathan says, anti-American. That's the way we play the ball game here. It's tough and it's mean and it can be awful, but that's the way it works.
But do you genuinely think that?
I mean, can I throw one other thing? The first thing we do when
who's going to decide when something's bad?
One of the first things we do in a fledgling democracy is promote a free press. It's one of the very, very first things we do because speech is so important. Unfiltered speech democracies can't survive without it. You know, we help them. I mean, there are two things we really do. I mean, and for what it's worth, you know, I was in Kosovo when we first went into Kosovo from the White House for, 10 weeks, so we started the whole kind of nation-building process there. So, I mean, I've seen some of this firsthand, is the only point to that. The two things we do are try and get a police force there so you get some basic protection for people's health and welfare, and get a free press going. That's the first two things we do.
So why do American viewers tune into the BBC for impartial coverage?
Why what?
Why do American viewers and hundreds of millions of people around the world tune into the BBC for impartial coverage? Given
You're asking a different question, though.
The BBC is legislated for political impartiality.
They can't, they're tired of NPR? I don't know.
But that's a different, but anyway, the impartiality of their reporting is entirely different than whether or not we ought to ban political advertising.
Isn't it linked?
They're funded as well.
I don't see how
I'll
it's
leave
linked
it-
in any way.
Okay. Enough. I don't know which of you two is.
The format of the debates this year is going to be different. As I understand it, candidates are going to be able to ask questions of each other rather than just stand up and do a list of talking points the way they have in the past. I'm curious to know, first of all, if you think that that is an improvement, and secondly, if you would handicap both the presidential and the vice presidential debates.
I think the debates are going to be fascinating this time. For me, the big question is who shows up. Is it the saddleback debate, where the Barack Obama who showed up was tentative, was a very bright man who gave you the impression that he had not quite lived long enough to know who he was and what he believed, but he was so bright that he could kind of mentally engineer his way. You could almost see engineer his way to an answer. But some people found that uncertain. That was a different Obama than I think we've seen in a lot of other parts of this campaign, less sure-footed. McCain was much better than he was in the primary debates. In the primary debates, he was doing bumper sticker lines and much less a certain man. And I think in the Saddleback debate, he gave the impression, hey, here's a guy who's been around a while, knows who he is, knows what he believes, knows what he stands for, and people found that very comforting. I think that was one of the turning points in the campaign. So do we see that confident McCain, the less bumper stickery guy, in a more conversational format as this may be? They're going to be seated at tables this time, much like they were, I think, at Saddleback, so I think that might help McCain. Obama, I think, obviously, bright guy, is going to see that Saddleback was not one of his best moments and will probably repair that. I don't know that the debates are going to be big agenda changers this time, in my view, except possibly, I think a lot of this election is already set, and this is going to be grinding its way to the finish line. We've kind of the noise level is now so high that it's going to be hard to change anything in this campaign. In a way, the campaign is almost over. So I do think the vice presidential debates are set up so that it's going to be difficult for, the bar for Palin is still going to be low. We've had zillions of dollars of media coverage and opinions from Republicans and Democrats saying that this woman can't possibly tie her shoes. Shouldn't even be considered. Gee, that's a story I'd love to have going into a debate, to set expectations. So I think she should be able to meet those standards and tie shoes.
I basically agree with Alex's assessment of both debates. I think that on the vice presidential side in particular, I'll give you a one-word prediction for that debate, and I'll end up being completely wrong, and that's cordial. That's what's going to happen there. Joe Biden is not going to go after her with guns blazing for all the obvious reasons that you all, can figure out. And she's not going to do the same thing back to him either. She's not going to want to come across as shrill or anything like that. So I think the two of them that is just going to be a very cordial affair. That'd be my prediction for that debate. The three presidential debates, I think it's always the case who shows up, and that's true for both of these guys. They've both had some good debates, they've both had some bad debates, they both had some great speaking appearances, they both had some less good speaking appearances. It tends to be that when Barack's future is really on the line, he steps up and hits it out of the park. That tends to be the case with him. We saw that in Iowa at the Jefferson-Jackson speech, really kicking off the final part of the caucus process. We saw that at the convention just a few weeks ago. So I expect to get a great performance from him. But McCain also can deliver and be very folksy and charming in his way. So, it depends who shows up, as Alex said. The other thing I would say about that is I agree with Alex that much of this election is formed. There is a piece in there, and these are the folks that decide this election, whose consensus is still forming. And the debates are one of the few remaining opportunities where you really can break through all of this ridiculous clutter that's out there in terms of information coming from the campaigns and coming from the media and coming from new media and coming in every direction that you could possibly imagine from independent groups and all of that. So the debates are one of the very few, or a few of the only remaining national moments that are kind of out there to influence those people who are still deciding. And the reason this race looks so close in the national polling, although a little less close on the map, which is something we haven't really talked too much about. But the reason it looks so close in the national polling is because, like I said before, we are 50-50, and those folks who decide these things, who in a 50-50 race, have not quite decided. So I think the debates could be very important in that regard. Oh, but neither of us actually answered your specific question, which is, how do we feel about the candidates asking each other a question? I think the biggest effect that will have is that there'll be a bunch of men and women like Alex and I sitting around a room for hours and hours and hours, throwing, what if we ask this? Oh no, and gaming out questions and trying to figure it out and never coming up with anything that interesting. That's the biggest effect.
It's also interesting that Obama lost a lot of the debates against Hillary on points per the news media and won them all. He's likable. He carries himself well and has presidential, all the dial testing and stuff, he overperformed on
although that's largely true for McCain too, if you take Huckabee out of the picture. Huckabee was Mr. Likable in those
one
debates.
One of the things these debates tend to do sometimes is level the field a little bit, and I think that may be especially true on the vice presidential turf, that if they both stand on the stage and both have a cordial debate, the one who has, I think, the most to gain may be Palin on that.
I'd like to talk about the role of identity in this campaign. Mr. Castellans, you mentioned that we've seen this election before, and I think in most of the examples you gave, the first things that come to my mind are policy proposals, are post-Great Depression, a plan for rebuilding the country. Post-Sputnik, Reaganomics, etc. Each of those examples seemed to generate a strong set of policy proposals to fix these challenges that were being faced. Now, this election cycle seems to be all about identity, and you yourself, you mentioned Sarah Palin and most of what you're saying, possibly because she has very few policy proposals, but that people are identifying with her as a hunter and as a fisher and as someone who can skin a bear or whatever. But, and then, Barack Obama, for example, has an intelligent and nuanced set of policy proposals to help reform our energy policy and whatnot, and he gets labeled an elitist. And I feel like these narratives have come up to have McCain the maverick, contrary to his political record, and Obama the elitist, contrary to the fact that some of his intelligent proposals might actually be intelligent proposals. And I wonder if you think, is the era of campaigning and a candidate winning based on their politics over?
No, I don't think so, but I'm not sure I would agree that a Roosevelt was elected because of his policies, right, or that a Kennedy was elected because of his policies. Now, they may have had great policies afterwards, or even a Reagan. I certainly wouldn't call, Reagan is a personality candidacy, if there ever was one. People who made you feel good about America.
And so was Clinton.
And so,
and nothing was wrong with it.
Here's the theory. America's only had one great president in modern times, embodied in several presidencies. The New Deal, FDR, same president, lead us out of the wilderness and uncertainty to the New Deal. John F. Kennedy, Sputnik, the new frontier, the same president, a Moses-like figure who's going to lead you out of the darkness into the light and the promised land. Reagan, the same president. Don't stop. Reagan was the shining city on a hill. American destiny can be anything we want. Bill Clinton, the same president. Again, man from hope, don't stop thinking about tomorrow, bridge to the 21st century. We're seeing the same president to lead us, and it's not so much issues as it is the president's job is to lead a country into this country is a frontier country still, lead us into the future. And in elections like these happen to be the ones where we pick, I think, our great presidents come from. And there's hope that maybe that will happen again. My hope, I thought that on the Republican side, that transformational figure, and that's what I think all those presidents are, I thought it would be someone like a Romney. I was misinformed. On the Democratic side, I think they've come much closer to that kind of figure. And that's why I think Barack Obama is such a formidable candidate this time, not because of his policies. It's not in a, you know, the presidential equation, and Jonathan's seen it up close, the issues change.
Right.
The
That's
tests,
exactly right.
the tests come and go. You know, if the law of the car keys is something we talk to candidates about, and that is, if I'm going to take you somewhere, what do I want to know? Where you give you my car keys, where you promise to take me, policy and issues, but can I trust you to take me there? Without that last one, the promises mean nothing. And American people, I think, are right to look at their leaders and judge their character and their vision.
The policies in the campaign help because they give you a sense of priority. They give you a sense of what that candidate cares about. So they are illuminating, but what they really do is help illuminate character as well. I mean, as Alex said, you run a campaign for 2 years, and you get into office, and everything is different. So it's actually very reasonable at the end of the day that it's a character judgment. The job really, and as you know, from my perspective, and I was there in the White House for 8 years, the job really is about judgment first and foremost. It is, I mean, this is why I think I was very, you know, I was happy for the McCain campaign to keep this argument about experience as long as they wanted, because that was never going to be, in a time of uncertainty when voters are willing to take a risk and go in another direction, experience is a red herring that everyone thinks is really important and doesn't matter at all. I mean, the experience, you know, I can tell you that reams of polling we had during the caucuses where everyone thinks experience, during the caucuses and primaries, experience is so important, and then it kind of just falls by the wayside as they make judgments ultimately about character. But the job, first and foremost, requires judgment. Second of all, to a lesser extent, it requires knowledge, but to a lesser extent. And third, it requires some capacity to inspire. Some capacity, once you make a judgment, to bring the nation to your side. And that means Congress, that means the public, that means the news media, whatever. But that's really what the ingredients for the job are. And the American public in some ways understands that pretty intuitively. You know, when John Edwards, and let's just put aside all the recent business, so to speak, but when John Edwards first ran for president in 2004, everyone says, oh no, he's not experienced enough. He's not experienced enough. When he ran for president in 2008, experience was not even a blip in our data. Why? Because voters were familiar with them. The real judge for voter experience is not experience in Washington or government. It's their experience with you. When you're new, they think you're inexperienced. When they've known you for a long time, they think you're experienced. They're not really worried about how long you've been patrolling the halls of Washington, D.C. They're worried about the judgment that you have, the kinds of decisions you'll make. So policies are important because they give you some illumination into what your priorities are, which helps to show what kind of judgment you'll make. But that, I mean, and honestly, I think Barack being against Iraq from the very beginning was a crucial component of his success, because for so many voters, it was just a display of better judgment than the rest of the crowd.
Hi. One question I have is that historically, it sort of seems that ultimately vice presidential picks don't have that much of an impact on the ultimate outcome of the election. But this year, there's been so much hype, and especially with Sarah Palin, I'm sort of curious how much you guys think in the end that will end up playing in.
Well, I think Alex, you know, basically nailed it before when he said that vice presidential picks in modern times, really since the archetype one really is Gore, but when vice presidential picks help to reinforce positives about the top of the ticket. There's basically no evidence ever. I mean, maybe not ever. Certainly not since Kennedy Johnson. There is no evidence of a person getting elected president because of who they picked as vice president. Okay? Certainly not influencing national polling to any significant degree, nothing like that. What there is evidence of is, particularly for the week to 10 days that the country's first getting used to the choice, of an ability to reshape, refine, and amplify the core message of a campaign. So Bill Clinton running for president in 1992 as a Southern, young, new kind of Democrat, picks Al Gore, and it's Southern, new kind of Democrat on steroids, right? When John McCain picked Sarah Palin, he got himself back to what voters already had a pretty strong sense of about him, this notion of him as a maverick. It wasn't like he hadn't built this maverick brand for a long time. But this completely reinforced the perception that he would take on, and frankly, the entire establishment, as we talked about before, helped make it happen. Because everyone in official Washington said, oh, you're crazy. And McCain stuck to his guns. No, this is what I think is right. And suddenly voters were like, oh, wow, Nick Maverick's back, you know? And so that's when I think vice presidential choices can make a difference. And certainly Clinton, with the choice of Gore and that convention, did get a big bump up. And they all kind of work together. It's hard to separate any of the pieces out. But I don't believe for a second that at the end of the day, anybody who thinks Barack Obama's too inexperienced to be president is going to vote for him because of Joe Biden, or thinks that John McCain is too much of an old white guy to be president, is going to vote for him because of Sarah Palin, and think he's fresh and change. I don't think that's going to happen. I think these choices give the person at the top of the ticket an opportunity to amplify their strengths, and that's really what they've become, and that's the smart way that they ought to be used.
In industrial age politics, you balance your ticket, geographically, et cetera. But what do you do when you're in the communications age? Your vice presidential choice is a communications piece on the chessboard. It's another opportunity, I think Jonathan was just saying, to drive your message, and that's how they're valuable.
Thank you both for being here. We've touched upon the issue of the press.
They always say things like that before they ask the tough questions.
No. I mean, not really.
See, now you've raised expectations on it.
You've spoken a little bit about the role of the press, more or less as an institution, in either looking at what the policy descriptions are, or the truthfulness, or the lack of truthfulness of particular ads, etc. But your job, as I understand it, is essentially to decide upon a message and deliver that message by whatever means necessary, while simultaneously protecting the candidates from undue scrutiny. There were, in this country, recently Sarah Palin gave her first interview with Mr. Gibson, and he asked some tough questions, at least enough tough questions for the McCain campaign to say that, he was being tough on her, or using big words in the hopes that she might not understand what he was talking about. And recently has said on their part that until there is fair and balanced coverage of Palin, that she won't be on the national news unscripted. I don't know if fair and balanced is, Fox News, you decide, or, what that may be. But there used to be institutions in which, it was like a bar. You had to pass that bar. I'm talking right now about Tim Russert and Meet the Press. You could not run for...
Do you know how many times Bill Clinton did Meet the Press before he was the nominee for president?
That's a good question. What's the answer?
Zero.
And this is sort of like what I'm getting at. And I understand that. Are we reaching a point at which the jobs of the media and communications directors of the campaigns are going to so isolate the candidates from a national platform unscripted in the news media that we won't, for example, see Sarah Palin on Meet the Press, even opposite Tom Brokaw instead of Russert? Obama and Biden, when the night that the DNC ended, sat down with 60 Minutes right away and had an unscripted interview. Obama's been on Meet the Press multiple times, as has McCain. Are we going to see that type of participation from the McCain camp, particularly in regard to Palin? Or is that over? Are we not going to see that anymore?
I start all of this with the presumption that this democracy thing is good, and that voters, when you average it all out, we have a presumption they can run the country. And if voters are thinking right now that somehow that what the media is providing to them is something they can ignore, is something they don't, hey, McCain ignores the news media today and doesn't give them a press conference. If that's happening, and voters aren't going to go out there with pitchforks or burn the house, storm the castle, maybe there's a reason. Maybe the media is less relevant to voters than it used to be, for a lot of reasons. Maybe as the market is fragmented, voters have other choices to get their information. Maybe they don't have to get it mediated by someone else. They can get it on their own. Maybe they, as the media has lived in this more fragmented world, the media's become more, back to the old Hearst days. We've got to get ratings, and so therefore we're going to talk about lipstick on a pig, or we're going to take our particular ideological point of view. But for whatever the case, I just don't think it's true that voters have decided, you know what, I'm going to be less informed today. Damn it, I know that John McCain's not going to be on Meet the Press, but I'm not going to care. I'm going to be less intelligent and less informed and knowledgeable than I was yesterday. That's great. I'm not going to appreciate the wonderful service that the media is doing for me today. No, maybe it's just not as valuable, and there's more competition, and the media is in transition at its role, just as every other institution in this world is, except maybe Washington.
I take your question a little bit more philosophically in the sense that you're kind of asking, what I took you to be asking is, so we're out there trying to drive a message, and all we care about is driving a message, and we'll select interviews, and we'll decide what reporters we talk to, and stage events, and put ads on TV, all in the service of that message. And it used to be that there was some, the way you put it, some sense that, well, you could do that all you wanted, but it wasn't sufficient if you didn't subject yourself or have your candidates subject themselves to certain media tests. I don't think that that's quite accurate, to be honest. I think that, the way it's always been, the way it has been for 200 some odd years, is that political campaigns get out there and try and set their agenda and tell the country, through whatever channels are available to them, what they want to tell the country. And the free press gets out there and questions it, pushes back, challenges it, fights it. And the free press is changing. I agree with much of what Alice was saying. The free press is not so much the Washington Post as the Huffington Post now. It's not so much just CNN as it's YouTube itself. But still, the press is out there driving and questioning and challenging and prodding, and ultimately the mishmash of information that gets provided through us trying to stick to one straight and narrow path, and through all these other providers of information trying to push us from it and question it and say we're lying about which direction we're going in, the public makes a judgment, and that is democracy, and that's kind of how it's supposed to work. I don't think in the largest sense it's any worse or better off than it's ever been. Better off in some ways because there's more avenues. Actually, that's not true. Better off because some of the kind of hegemony of major outlet control is fracturing. I think that's probably a good thing for democracy overall because it just allows more voices into the conversation. But I don't think that much has changed. I don't think that our jobs are fundamentally that different from the jobs of whoever was, advising, John Adams 2 centuries plus ago.
And one last note, I don't think that the people you find on either side of the fence in the political business are very different than you.
Right.
We actually, most of us, Democrat and Republican, who do this by far, are people who do this because they actually believe in something, not because they believe in nothing. And so what you find are people who are intensely passionate about Barack Obama and a change and see a better thing. And people like that are, I think our ability to spin and do that is way overrated. But it makes good television and it makes good newspaper stories and the gotcha. And I think a lot of times the gotcha stuff is more out of a need driven by the marketplace than conflict campaigns actually provide.
So this question is for Alex. And I was watching the Republican conventions and they had the picture of the Twin Towers, and some people would argue, oh, it's the GOP at its old exploitation of fear tricks again. And then in fairness, I think Hillary Clinton did a little bit of it during the primaries. But
I heard,
actually, who do you want answering the phone? So flashing back to 2004, my question is, how much did fear play a role? How much of it was a factor in the elections? And how justified was that fear when when voters pulled the lever? And if you care to answer, what role did you play in that fear?
Okay. I'm pro-fear. I think there's some things we ought to be scared of that rational, reasonable people should be afraid. certainly fear for fear's sake, that's something else. But hey, we live in a dangerous world. And I think at times through the complacency of the 80s, we lost track of that tomorrow may not necessarily be automatically given to us as a gift. The role of fear, interesting story. Pavlov, right? Ring the dinner bell, conditioning, the dogs salivate, right? You train people emotionally, dogs, whatever, to remember a searing emotional conditioning. Another second Pavlov experiment was one day there was a flood in the laboratory, and the river overflowed its bank, water came up, and the dogs were in cages in the lab. And the water kept coming up, and they couldn't get the dogs out. Finally, at the last minute, they got the dogs out. Interesting thing happened. The dogs lost all their conditioning. They forgot the training, ring the dinner bell, But eventually, as time passed, they were retrained and kind of became who they were again. And one day, as an experiment, Pavlov poured a little bit of water under the laboratory door. And just like that, the dogs lost all their conditioning again. They returned to that searing emotional moment that imprinted them. And I think one of the things we saw at the Republican convention, going back to New York, it was almost impossible to move Bush numbers, the favorables, in that election. George Bush was who George Bush was. I joke that it's like burning down the same house twice. You can't do it. He is who he is, and that's it. One of the few things that would move numbers was 9/11. And when George Bush, to see him standing on that pile of rubble and going back to that GOP convention, did that. One of the last, that's why we did the Wolves ad last, to take people back there. The other ad that ran was an ad from the Republican convention. And is it, that's its political effect. And
Let's just be clear that the only person on this stage who's compared the American voters to Pavlov's dogs is Alex.
No, and the point, and in all fairness here, I'm not, the point I hope I'm trying to make here is that big searing emotional things can take us back to places. And that, by the way, that's not a bad thing, that's a good thing, because there are things that we in time forget, and perhaps we shouldn't. I think it is, we say now that the economy is the only issue people care about. Certainly, it's huge. Part of that, I think, is that some success in foreign policy, and in Iraq, it's less of an issue because it seems to be going better finally than it was. But we all still think that there's another shoe that could drop at any moment. We're all kind of feeling for, especially in this city, I would think. So is it fair to remind people of that? I'd say it's not only fair, it's necessary, it's important, it's something we should think about.
If your theory is right, why doesn't Obama's claim that McCain will bring back the Bush administration raise the fear of God?
Interesting thing there, and I'll offer you, and Jonathan may have a different view on this, but the generic ballot for Republicans has changed in the past few weeks and months here. Republicans, if you ask people if they were a Democrat or a Republican, we were about 10 points down, and now we're only 4 or 5 in some surveys. Why? Well, one reason was we were defined by George Bush. What a Republican was George Bush. And as Jonathan says, that wasn't great. So people, hey, don't vote Republican. This campaign has been longer than a life sentence. Longer than train smoke, this thing. And it's going on forever. And guess what? People are getting to know both these candidates, and people are getting to see, hey, the Republican brand is not kind of where it used to be, where we're coming from. The Republican brand is what it's going to be, this McCain guy. And we're meeting him on his own for 2 years. Oh, he's a little different. He is his own guy. And I think the McCain is Bush equation, I think that's kind of a dead and dying storyline for the Democrats. I think they've said it, people have heard it. It ain't about that anymore. And I think we're moving to I think they've run out of script there. And I think you're going to keep hammering that. And that's fine, keep it under, kind of as a baseline thing. But the Democrats have to go somewhere else to win this election. And this new economic turmoil may be that opportunity for them and for Republicans too. Somebody's got to stand up and say, hey, I'm taking command of this situation like you know, a governor would in Katrina, like Bush didn't in Katrina. Somebody's got to stand up and seize the moment here, and that could do it. But I just don't see the Bush.
I agree with
taking them much farther.
I agree with the first part of the analysis that it's not. I said this a little earlier. It's not surprising to me that this race is closed. It's not surprising to me that the generic is closed. You come out of the conventions where the country, the great part of the country that was not, you know, as swept up in these primaries as the rest of us were, is finally tuning in. And in the most literal sense, John McCain is not George Bush. He's just not. He's John McCain. So the numbers are going to change. They're just learning about him. They're getting introduced. Now, I disagree with the second part of the analysis, that it's what we were talking about before. Policies give an insight into what you care about, where your values are, what your priorities are. I think that as we show that John McCain's latest set of values and policy proposals are strikingly similar to George Bush's, people are going to get a sense that this is the kind of guy who is not going to bring them the change that they want. So I think it is good messaging. I think it's messaging that needs to be delivered and communicated. It's information that they don't have. And so I think we've got to get that information out there. I think, you know, all that matters is what comes next, is really the truth in terms of the information that's being presented to the public over the next 6 weeks or so. The fact that we've been saying more of the same and screaming it for all those months leading up to the summer, it's really not relevant. The little slice of the electorate that we're talking about doesn't have their minds made up, who didn't really participate in these nominating contests, who are going to move this 50-50 nation one way or the other, they're really just tuning in. And so I think that's important information for them to have. But it's definitely a piece of work that has to take place. It's not obvious. John McCain is not George Bush, right? And he's got a brand of his own that kind of, you know, suggests otherwise, given that he's run against him and was, you know, George Bush's enemy #1 for a while. So it's definitely work that needs to be done. But it's work that's based on the truth. It's work that's based on the positions he's adopted over the course of this campaign and the values that he avows to hold dear. So I think it will have legs if it's communicated effectively. But again, because it will show some insight into who McCain is and what he really cares about.
There's been quite a bit of talk in the campaign recently about small town values. Somebody has to play the village idiot, so I've nominated myself here. I am interested in the Bush-McCain relation, but from a different angle that has come up so far. We are awash in mendacity. This country has been ruled by mendacity for the entire duration of the 21st century. We were lied into war. This is not a controversial statement. We were lied and distorted and deceived into what turned out to be many thousands of deaths, many more thousands of grievous injuries, and the United States stuck in an occupation in the middle of the Middle East. And it is not controversial that this took place as a result of lies and deception. There's one other element, however, that contributed to this. A book was on the bestseller list a few years ago. Because it succeeded in being on the bestseller list, I don't feel awkward, or as awkward as I might have, naming its title here in the hallowed quarters of the journalism school. It was called, as some of you know, On Bullshit. It was a book written by a philosopher named Harry Frankfurt. And as I understand it, the argument of this book was that there's a kind of discourse that has worked its way through our contemporary lives. It's not unique to the United States, but it is prevalent here. And it consists of utterances that are stated not for their truth value or their falsity, but with disregard for whether they are true or not. So I'll now amend my first point about mendacity and say, we're living in a time of mendacity and bullshit. George Bush was the president and continues to be the president of mendacity and bullshit. And John McCain has given us a campaign that well-known expert on mendacity and bullshit, Karl Rove, declared this week was perhaps over the edge. And I don't have to go through all the details. You all know this. We're all watching this stuff. We watched John McCain declare as a factual matter, not a matter of opinion, a factual matter, that Barack Obama would rather lose a war than lose an election. And we've heard this about the pigs, and we heard this about, now this is in the category of bullshit, that it's a recommendation for Vice President that your state abuts Russia. I mean, I'm speechless. I've lived through a lot of campaigns. I'm speechless.
Sure, you may be many things, but not speechless.
I'm inspired.
I have to confess that was right there for me too.
Now, touche. When I was a kid, I was taught that it was wrong to lie for two reasons. One is, well, one didn't even need to be stated, but the other was that lying is corrosive. When everybody is lying, life is unmanageable. I think we have reached the point at which the cynicism of this entire process is on the verge of making the world unmanageable. And I say the world not for hyperbole's sake, but because as anybody you meet in any country that I've been and have had these conversations in, we're not just voting for President of the United States, we're voting for someone who is as close as anyone could be to the king of the world. So this process, which we have been schooled to believe is normal politics and normal public life, is actually turning out to make the world a swamp of moral squalor. And I would be interested in your reactions to this observation.
Oh gosh, where should we begin? Let me just throw out a couple of thoughts. One is some of the things that I think in the sheltered world in which perhaps you may live, sir, with all due respect, are still controversial. I know some of those people, and I think it is as unfair to say that they, and I know a great number of Americans do think we were lied into war. I don't happen to be one of them. And I would take exception to that, and I think it is the same kind of level of debate that says, hey, Republicans hate senior citizens and children and like to starve people, which is a debate, you know, as a Republican guy working in campaigns, I hear all the time. Well, guess what? You know, it ain't that way. As to your concern about, you know, truth in politics, there's a wonderful book called Authenticity that I would recommend. And it is about what happens to us as we move from, again, industrial age to the communications age. And we live in a world where we deal with things as perceptions as opposed to the things, immediate things themselves. And you find things like, you know, real all of a sudden becomes a selling point for any kind of product or service. You know, real butter, real blue jeans, real country crock spread. It doesn't come from the country. It doesn't come in a crock. One name, two lies. You find, you know, Disney is big. False authenticity. You know, people don't play fantasy football. Real football, we play fantasy football. But you know, long ago, people said art is what? Art is the lie that tells the truth. and we are increasingly distanced in a culture, by the nature of the communications culture, we're increasingly distanced from what is real. And you end up with candidates like Al Gore, who, as they try to become more real, add another layer of, every time he tries to become more real, he adds another layer of perception to the onion. Finally, there's so many layers, you've lost all hope of getting to the core of the thing. Some of it, I think, is just a reflection of our culture. But at the end of the day, I would just think that most folks see through the bullshit. You do, and I think if you can figure it out, probably others can. And so my faith in democracy is not lessened, and I don't think we're going into the moral swamp. And if, as long as folks like you and others can figure it out, we'll sort through it and maybe get something better out of it.
Do you want me to add to it? Look, I think that politics is filled with truths and half-truths and untruths, and it can be a sorry business. And I think that this administration in particular, obviously, has not been without its share of deception, to put it a little more mildly than you did. Well, I kind of know where Alex is coming from when he says that he doesn't think we were lied into war. I think we were certainly massively exaggerated, misled, and manipulated into war. So, it kind of depends where you draw that bright line of, lie. But I don't think that this administration has been a paragon of honesty. The truth was kind of stretched and turned and tortured every which way on many, many occasions, and to the point where other members of the administration, like Colin Powell, objected to it and were overruled. So, like I said, I don't think this administration is going to win any prizes for honesty, and I think that's why the country is, part of the reason why the country is so tired of him. And hopefully the country will have learned something from it, and hopefully the folks in the news media and all sorts of it and will have learned something from it. I think it helped, frankly, to push some of the new media, some of the disgust with the way the mainstream media was complicit in some of that manipulation. I think helped to light some of the kindling underneath folks who helped pioneer some of the new media outlets that I'm sure would have come anyway, but came along. So I think, we make progress from it. But I don't know if there's not a particular answer you're looking for, because it was more of a sermon. That's kind of my take on it. I mean, I will say one other thing, just in the interest of complete candor, which will not be completely popular. The one thing that I don't think the Bush administration lied about was that they thought that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction. And I say that because I was in the Clinton administration, and I had the highest security clearance you can have, and I got the president's daily briefing every day, and we thought there was WMD there too. That's true. Now, it was a massive failure of our intelligence community. It doesn't mean they didn't make stuff about yellow cake in Niger, and they didn't manipulate lots of other things, but it's true that this government believed that there were WMD in Iraq at the time that I left the government, which was in 2000. So maybe were they lying a couple of years later? Did the intelligence estimate change? I don't know. Bush wasn't forwarding me copies of the PDB, but so for what that's worth.
So we've been talking a lot about advertising this evening, but there's another pretty big element to this campaign that I think is the ground game. And Obama's been pouring millions and millions into his ground game, registering people to vote, identifying new voters. I just wanted to know if you think that this is going to have more of an impact than we've seen in the polls on Election Day, and if you think the polls have been able to capture that thus far.
It depends how good it is. History so far indicates that it's going to be very, very good. It made a big, big difference in 2004 for the Bush campaign. The Karl Rove, Ken Mehlman, and those guys built a fantastic, highly compartmentalized, very information-rich organization that was able to pull people out that, frankly, the pollsters weren't even picking up on. So it can make a huge difference. There's no question that, to my mind, one of the great, one of the big MVPs of this campaign has been David Plouffe. David Axelrod's a great guy, fantastic, done a great job on the strategy. But Plouffe, who's run their organization day to day, really found a way to do what the Dean campaign certainly never did, which was take all this enthusiasm and all these new voters and kind of bottle the lightning and translate it into people who actually not just showed up at the polls, which ultimately is what's most important, but organized and went out and got there, recruited new people to vote, recruited new people to participate. So they have done a phenomenal job of organization building. And in a close race, obviously that can make a huge difference.
I'm certainly impressed with it. You know, I was there in Iowa when saw all these people showing up at the caucuses, and it was Republicans who were voting for Barack Obama, and ooh, somebody's good. And so I think it's a very powerful organization, what they've done with text messaging and send us your email and all of that stuff. You know, a cause is different than a campaign. A cause beats campaigns. And Barack Obama had a cause early on, and the technology comes along just at that moment to bottle it. And so they've applied both compared to the McCain campaign. There wasn't that much passion there early. So, you know, it's hard to bottle what is not there. So it takes time to build a ground game in an organization. Now, finally, there's that energy and passion on the Republican side, and that really changed with the Palin pick. But it's awful late in the game to be trying to create that organization. Now, the Republicans do have some history of doing it, of the mechanism there. They can, you know, they're not starting from scratch, but I think, you know, you go to a state like Virginia this time, it's going to be in play. You know, places where they may be too far behind, like Montana, to really make a difference, put them over the top, it may not make a difference. Maybe Montana will be closer than I think. But Virginia, a state that could be close, that's a state that Barack Obama could take with ground game.
But do you see any sort of possibility that these polls are just not capturing these people?
You know, I keep asking that, and people tell me yes and no. So, I'll tell you, I don't know the answer to that question, but what people tell me is that and kids especially, young Obama voters, guess what? They don't have landlines. Guess what? Who do pollsters call? People with landlines. Hey, pollsters are aware of this, so what do? Weight it. But how can you weight things that aren't there? I'm not real sure. So we got a real problem with this one.
I mean,
think there's a big chance.
The big secret of all this polling, obviously, is that the results are based on all kinds of assumptions and judgments that the pollsters make, which is their job, and it's not their fault for making them. They've got to make all kinds of assumptions about what the turnout is going to look like. I mean, they ask questions to probe who's going to turn out, and then the information they get from that they use to adjust the sample that gives you the results in the horse, you know. So Alex is exactly right. Who knows? It's like they're making some judgments. They may be right, they may be wrong. In Iowa, everybody's polls were wrong except for the Des Moines Registers, and you know, which came out 2 or 3 days before and showed Barack winning this thing by 3 or 4 points. You know, a funny story, on New Year's Eve, I sat in this restaurant in Des Moines with Howard Wolfson, who was a good friend of mine, who was Hillary's communications director. And the register poll has just come out, and it has Barack in first place. And Howard and I are there, and, you know, 2/3 of the national press corps is all in the same restaurant in Des Moines. And one by one, they came to our table, and Howard and I just double-teamed the poll. There's no way it's right, there's no way it's right, we feel really good, there's no way he's that far ahead, and we just went through all the reasons why the judgments they make show a turnout of, you know, 300,000 plus, that's no way that's going to happen, and all these reasons why the poll was wrong. And the poll was right. The register is dead on. So, you know, who knows?
Thank you.
I don't think that, well, I didn't hear an answer to the question about the role of race and identity politics in the campaign. The first presidential campaign that I remember is candidate Ronald Reagan starting his campaign for the presidency in Philadelphia, Mississippi, where 3 civil rights workers were murdered on a platform of bringing back states' rights. I've lived through Willie Horton's and Reverend Wright's, and I was really curious when I heard about your role in producing this Harvey Gantt video. I want to know, in terms of crafting campaign messages, whether they're truth or message. American culture has a cultural shorthand that's very easy to fall into. It's very difficult for me to believe that that's accidental. And I've always been very curious about you know, maybe there's no, you know, at the end of the day, it's all about winning the campaign. But how does one craft a campaign message knowing that it speaks to the very lowest and sinister elements in our culture's history, and reinvokes it in ways that does play to people's fears, sometimes their misinformation. But I would
happy to answer that. It's a good
wonderfully
question.
want to know that.
Happy to answer that, and I can tell you how I look at it, and the decisions I've made. I came to this country in 1961 from Havana, Cuba. My parents came over here, and you know, my first president was John F. Kennedy, and this country was a land that took us in and offered my family all the hope and promise in the world. And one of the things it told me and my family was that in this country you can do and be anything you want, regardless of where you come from, what your faith is, what your color is, all of that. I came to that country and believed those things. And so, when I got into politics to fight for the things that I believe in, somebody's wrong on an issue, somebody's right on an issue, I am able to go in there and say, you know what? I'm not supposed to disqualify somebody or qualify them or exempt them from an attack because of their color or their faith or anything else. I'm supposed to treat everybody the same here. That's the big idea of this country. So Harvey Gantt is wrong on affirmative action. I can't do an ad about him because Harvey Gantt's a black man.
No.
No. Now, I will say this. When I was in my 20s or early 30s or whenever it was and I made that ad, it honestly did not occur to me to pull the punch on this. It might now. I hope, though, I hope that if I had to do it again, I would be as courageous and do it because the guy was wrong on an issue, and then if I would have done it against a candidate of one race, you do it against another.
I don't mean to be combative, but if your family...
Oh, why not?
If
We're
you arrived in
among friends.
1961, you arrived just in time for the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., for the assassination of President Kennedy, for his brother, for many people.
And one of those
some of
things
whom
that
were
I
brought
learned,
to this country under different
and one
conditions.
of those things I learned from Martin Luther King was that the content of your character mattered more. And I actually, you sold me. I believe that, and I believe that to this day. And I believe someday my kids might get a job or be denied a job because of their last name. I hope they never reach for that to get something because of where they come from. I hope they're never disqualified for some job because of a special thing because they come from a different place, or they're disqualified for a job because of where they come from. No, I don't want to live in that country. I don't want to live in a country that picks people out or disqualifies them that way. So I choose not to. My choice is to say, okay, that's the way it should be, and let's all try to live in it today in these choices. And that's how I make my choices in political campaigns.
Clarence Thomas said the exact same thing as a black man who didn't believe in affirmative action.
I'm supposed to be swayed with what one black man who actually benefited from affirmative action has to say?
Powell said the same thing. I'm just saying that you're using...
So he's our spokesperson now?
Not at all. But
Okay.
you're mentioning race, and so I'm saying it's not just... You have to look at everybody's perspective, and I don't think, not to say that two black men are the perspective of all. I'm just saying there are other sides, both African American...
I actually asked about the role of racial symbolism in political advertisement, not as social policy. I mean, I respectfully disagree with you about being able to sort of drop oneself into a contemporary moment and disregard the context.
Look, I'm not saying that context is not there. And I don't know that today, if I'm making those decisions, would I make them the same? All I know is I can choose to believe that this country is I'm the guy who thought, hey, Mitt Romney won't be disqualified by some voters because he's a Mormon. Guess what? I was wrong. He was. I would make the same decision today, though, because I think that's what I think you appeal to the best in folks in that way. Live it. And so, I hate to make TV commercials and say, hey, Alex, you got to recut this spot. Why? You don't have a black guy in here. You don't have, and we hear this in political campaigns all the time, you have to show diversity. God, guys, that's who was there. I'm just covering it. No, we've got to make an effort. Do we really? Is that important? Or is it just, is that more, is it less true? Or is, I choose, when given the choice, not to play that game and just put it out there. It's a different way of looking at it.
It's not an answer to the question.
Hmm?
I don't think that's an answer to the question.
Okay.
It means why we should depict your views on politics.
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing
gotta speak up.
No, please. That's why we're here. Throw it out. If you're going to say it so we can all hear it.
I don't think it's an answer to the question because she's asking about the way you choose to visualize your decisions about policy and politics. So, sorry. Should I say it a third time? I don't think it's an answer to her question because she's asking why do you choose the means you do to depict your policies. I think the question is promoting that there are other ways to get your message across, and you're aiming very low, I would agree. Because to say that people should be reminded of 9/11 is not the same as saying they should wake up every morning fearing that there's going to be an attack. Because that's not how the general public should exist.
You are going to decide there's a better way that you think that should be done, right?
It's not about your decision-making process.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm just asking. Well, I'm trying. What is it? I'm asking what I failed at. I guess I'm not quite clear.
Actually, you succeeded. I mean, those ads were very effective.
Well, yes, but your point is that, or certainly the gentleman's point is, there's another way, and it was less emotionally evocative. Is emotion the enemy? Is that what we're talking about?
No, I have no problem with provocation. That's not the issue. Maybe I'm wrong here. I don't know.
No, if you'll help me, I will try to, look, I'm done. I'm not making commercials. I'm not working for the McCain campaign. I'm here to try to, if you guys have a real question about how yours truly or anybody else thinks, I'm happy to try to answer it. I'm not sure I understand. If you got something to say it, and we'll talk about it. But I'm not sure I understand it. If the problem is that in the 9/11 case, that's appealing to someone's baser instincts, I would disagree.
Can I just, really simply what they're trying to say is, how do you feel about using racist shorthand in your advertisements? That's all they were trying to say. And I guess your question back to them is, hey, if you want to get a certain message across, is there a better way to do it?
My answer would be that in this country, you shouldn't be precluded from saying something. If I were a black man making that commercial, if I were standing in a church in Harlem saying that affirmative action, which I've heard ministers do, say affirmative action is a terrible idea. It makes Americans think less of someone who's black in America. If a man of a different race can say that, then I should be able to say that same thing without he's using code words. That's the America I choose to live in. That's fair. And I would take strong exception to saying, hey, I'm finding a sneaky way to use racial code words. No, I don't believe that of myself, and I don't try to do that. But I also don't think I should be restricted from engaging in a debate because of the color of someone's skin. So no. I won't go there.
One question I have to both people, which is a little interesting, is I try and watch the campaigns from like a hawk or someone who's over. It's interesting talking about fear because I see Obama peddling economic fear. Fear the economy, fear about your jobs, fear your jobs are going overseas, vote for me. And I've gotten into fights with my friends about this because I think that in politics, the end game is to win. I don't care really how you do it. And I think that Democrats are sometimes torn between a moral high ground and a low ground, where Republicans can basically center, win, and then worry about the moral high ground and low ground after. And I don't think lying is exclusive to Republicans. I think that Democrats lie and Republicans lie. I think politicians lie. Bill Clinton is a prime example of someone who lied and got caught. I mean, we can't deny the fact. So basically, I want to know from your perspective, do you think it's more important to worry about high ground and low ground, or should you win?
Well, I think we both would agree that you need to win. I think we'd also both agree that there's a certain level of there's a certain level of hard hitting and criticism that's completely within bounds, and obviously there is some civility that's still required. I think that, generally speaking, I don't think it's not that I think it's immoral so much. I actually think it's counterproductive as well. I think like when you get to be too personal, when attacks get too ad hominem, I don't think they work. So I think things that are more substantively based work better than things that aren't. But I think the game is to win. And, from my perspective, I think that you do want to preserve a certain level of credibility and honesty, because I think voters have a great nose ultimately for the truth, and that you undermine, if you're telling people you want to take it in one direction, and then as Alex was saying before, in terms of the ultimate metaphor that really helps inform the decision, where do you want to go? And you say, this is where I want to go. And then meanwhile, you're saying something that they know, they just smell a rat about what else you're saying. Well, you're undermining your ability to deliver that message about where you want to go. So I think that's important. I think that kind of credibility is important. But I don't think we should be afraid of hitting back and hitting hard. I think there's some truth, Alex will disagree with this, but there is some truth to the notion that in presidential politics in particular, not so much on the state and local level, Republicans for the last 40 years or so have been better at campaigning, and we've been better at governing. I wish we could do a little bit better job of campaigning about our ability to govern and get it out there. But I think this campaign is doing a good job at it. And it's we basically had two campaigns where Democrats won, and then we had a 50-50 race that a Democrat prevailed in nationally, and arguably electorally, arguably in quotes. And then we had a 50-50 race that a Democrat narrowly lost. So here we are, 50-50 nation. I think we've got this fight joined pretty well, and we need to close the deal. I agree with you. The end of the game's got to be about winning, though. And I'm dying to go to the men's room, so I'm going to jump up for a second. Sorry.
I think that we may have come to an end. I thought the questions were very good, and unfortunately, we began to get into a discussion at the end that might have been worth the whole panel. But I wanted to thank Alex and Jonathan for being far better than I expected. And I picked them. But it really was a pleasure, and I hope the audience enjoyed it as well.